This is Somewhere in the Skies with Ryan Sprague.
Welcome, everyone, to another live podcast recording of Somewhere in the Skies. I am your host, Ryan Sprague, and a very good morning to everyone in the UK, all across Europe, and a very, very early good morning to our moderator today, Suzanne, who's joining us. I don't even know what time it is there. 5 a.m. Yep, 5 a.m. So a very special thank you to her for moderating today. I am so excited. We haven't talked to our guest today in, almost a year at this point, and so much has happened, not only in the United States, but over in Australia as well. So you know what that means. We're going to be talking to the one and only Grant Lavac, and we are taking your listener questions, guys. So if you have any questions for Grant, please put them in either the super chat or put them in capital letters with a Q in front of them, and we will get to those towards the end of the broadcast today. Other than that, I do want to let you guys know that we are constantly updating the speaker list for Anomicon. I almost called it Enomicon. Anomicon, the free virtual conference that I have founded, and we put on the last one last year, and it just was a huge success. So we've got another one coming to you September 1st and September 2nd. You can learn all about that at anomicon.com. There should be links in the show notes for you as well. If not, I'm sure Suzanne will be right on top of that. Please like and subscribe if you haven't done that already. Check out our Patreon page as well if you'd like to help support the show in other ways. If you can't do that monetarily, just click like, click subscribe, share the show. That's all I could ever ask of you guys. But without further ado, let's bring him in. We have so much to talk about a really interesting revelation that Grant himself was able to uncover when it comes to UAP in Australia. So let's bring him in without further ado. Grant Lavac, welcome back, brother.
Thanks, Ryan. It's good to be with you again, my friend. Thanks for having me on. It's probably been close to a year since we last spoke. So, yeah, good to see you again, man.
You too. I know it's getting late in the evening over it's crazy. Isn't this crazy how we can do this stuff now in
I know
all
it's
different time zones?
everything's and we've got you're in Scotland, we've got I'm in Australia, you've got everyone else is all over the place, all over the world. Suzanne's in the States, so it's great.
Yep.
Everyone can connect no matter where they are around the world.
Exactly, and we all connect on one thing, right? And that's UFOs, UAP, and we got so much to talk about in terms of what's going on now in that world, man. But I'd like to catch our audience up for maybe some of them who aren't familiar with your work and all of that. Give us the origin story. How did you first get involved in the UAP topic, and what inspired you to join our crazy little community?
So actually, before I forget too, I wanted to congratulate you on the success with Somewhere in the Ring so far. So,
oh, thank you.
Good work, man, with that. And I was actually just thinking the other day, with the recent Republican National Convention when Hulk Hogan was out there doing his thing. I was thinking,
Trumpomania, baby.
Exactly. I was thinking how epic. Imagine how epic it would have been if after Hogan's done his speech, everyone's chanting USA, USA. The arena lights just cut to black and Undertaker's music just comes on. That would just be. I reckon that would have been even better. But anyway,
hey, there's still time at the Democratic National Convention,
that's true,
right?
That's true.
Something could happen.
Yeah.
Thank you.
But no, to your question. So I mean, I'm a child of the '80s, so I'm 45 years of age. Look a little few years beyond that, but in the mid '80s, I'm originally from Sydney, Australia, and in the mid '80s, my father took me to a UFO photo exhibition that was on display at Australia's highest or tallest building skyscraper called Sydney Centrepoint Tower back in the day, and I think it's called something similar. It's kind of like the Seattle Space Needle, looks kind of like the same. Okay. And so they had this UFO photo exhibition at the top of Sydney Centrepoint Tower, and they had all these famous black and white photos of UFOs from the 50s and the decades after that. And one of the photos was the famous McMinnville photo, and I'd never seen. That was kind of my first induction or initiation into what UFOs were, and I just completely lost myself in this blow up of the McMinnville photo and lost myself just staring at that photo for a good 10-15 minutes. And then so that kind of got me curious at a young age. And then growing up as a teenager in the 90s, and I'm sure my fellow Aussies that are in the chat are probably bored of me telling the story, but when we're teenagers in the 90s, in Australia, come Wednesday night, every 9 p.m., you'd watch the X-Files without fail, and then you'd talk about it the next day with your mates at school. And so then, in my adult years, in the 2000s and beyond, my kind of interest ebbed and flowed. But it wasn't until, like for so many other people, the New York Times bombshell articles in December 2017, where that really got my eyebrows up. And then throughout COVID, we all had so much time at home that I kind of threw myself into the topic again out of sheer curiosity with everything that had been happening since 2017 in the US, and just tried to learn as much as I could from as many people as I could on the topic. And I credit Luis Jimenez to getting me off my backside and engaging my elected representatives on the topic, because he was the founder of the Big Phone Home initiative. If your audience is not aware of it, kind of like a live stream activism event. And so that really got me off my backside and asking the question, well, what is Australia doing about the UAP topic? Because the US has been taking it seriously for quite a number of years. And that sent me on a path of trying to engage my elected representatives on the topic and advocate for them to take the topic seriously, and also exercise my right to information through the Freedom of Information Act, and try and find out what the Australian government and Department of Defence knows and doesn't know on the UAP topic in an Australian context. So that's kind of a really super quick summary as to where I've come from and where I am sort of today.
I love it. I love it. Well, I have, and maybe I'm just very ignorant when it comes to the FOIA. John Greenwald's going to be very disappointed in me, but I've always wanted to know, Grant, like as a citizen of Australia, can you file FOI requests in the US? Like, how does that work? Can anyone in the world do that in a country that they aren't a citizen of? I've never really even asked that question of anybody.
It's actually a great question, and it's one that I didn't know the answer to for a long time. But yes, if you're not a US citizen, you're not prohibited from submitting a US FOIA request. So other countries, so I'm an Australian citizen, I can actually submit US Freedom of Information Act requests. There's no restrictions on non-US citizens submitting requests. Now that's different of different countries. Like in Australia, in New Zealand, they call it the I think it's the Office of the Official Information Act, I think it is, where you have to be a citizen of New Zealand to submit a request. I think in Australia it's the same. You have to be an Australian citizen or resident to be able to submit an Australian freedom. And Canada, you have to be a Canadian citizen. So each country may be slightly different, but to submit a US Freedom of Information Act request, you don't have to be a US citizen. And that's what I think a lot of people don't realize. If they've got topics that are of interest to them and they want to find out more, they can submit a FOIA request to whatever agency they believe holds the information they're looking for.
There you go. See, lesson learned, man. That's actually really exciting, because I never knew, what the restrictions or I guess the liberations were when it came to something like that. In terms of those requests, you've been filing a lot in your own country to try to get information. And I know early on when you started doing this, there was a lot of frustration. You were coming up against a lot of brick walls. And that is slowly, and I use that term slowly with a capital S, changing over there in Australia. And we'll get to the UAP working group. But before we do that, what were some of your earlier, I guess, successes or failures, even when it came to submitting these requests, and any information that you were or weren't getting back? Are there any really memorable stuff early on in your research?
Yes, I mean, I always kind of position myself as a student of FOIA. I learn something new every single day, and I'm really grateful that I've been able to learn from the likes of John Greenwald Jr. directly, and he's actually been a great help in some FOIA requests that I've submitted, in Australia, and you know because early on I didn't know the machinations of the FOIA process. I had a lot of refusals early on. Sometimes and John Greenwald has said this a number of times with FOIA, it's kind of like all about finding the Goldilocks zone. You can't be too general and you can't be overly specific, or often you'll get a no records response, or sometimes if your request is way too broad, they'll just knock you back with an automatic refusal on the grounds that the potential administrative burden to the FOIA office is so extensive. It's just too big of a request for them to dedicate the administrative resources to. But in terms of in terms of what's comparable between Australian FOIA and US FOIA, they're actually really similar. A lot of the same sort of similar exemptions in the interest of national security, privacy information, international relations with other countries. One of the exceptions is that in Australia, and this is one of the frustrations I've got with the Australian FOIA, is a lot of the intelligence services in Australia. We're talking about the Defence Intelligence Organisation, the Australian Security Intelligence Organisation, our Geospatial Organisation, the Office of National Intelligence, and there are a number of others. They're all exempt from FOIA. So I can't go after any information within their holdings through FOIA. Whereas in the United States, that's not necessarily the case. You can submit FOIA to a number of the intelligence services. Unfortunately, for US FOIA, the turnaround times are ridiculous. I mean, John Greenwald Jr. just put out, a post on X today saying that he's broken his record for the longest response time of like 15 years or something ridiculous on his, he lodged the request 15 years ago. Whereas in Australia, I thankfully to date haven't had to wait that long. The longest response time I've had is probably upwards of 6 months, but in most cases, it's usually between 30 to 90 days that you get a response. There's a statutory deadline for response of 30 days in Australia, meaning they have to provide you with some form of response in 30 days. But more often than not, they'll request an extension on the deadline. So they'll reach out to you and say, look, we can't meet the statutory deadline of 30 days for response. Are you willing to accept an additional 30-day extension? And so they'll negotiate with the submitter to try and come to an agreement on an extended timeline. So that's the advantage for me in Australian FOIA. It's much faster turnaround times, and in the US it's just much slower. And the document which we can talk about this evening, I only received the FOIA response and documents today, and I submitted that request in June of last year. So it's been more than a year since that it's taken for that request to come back. But some of the successes that I've had, I mean, the one that's probably for me most memorable is for the frame of reference of your audience that maybe don't know what's happening or hasn't been happening in Australia. In October of 2021, an Australian senator by the name of Peter Whish-Wilson, who all of my Aussie friends on the call on the stream will know, he, following the release of ODNI's preliminary assessment on UAP back on the 25th of June 2021, Senator Whish-Wilson asked the then Chief of Air Force about, well, what is Australia doing about UAPs? Has the Royal Australian Air Force, who's always traditionally taken the lead on the UAP topic in Australia, because we've investigated UAP in Australia almost as long as the US has, 1950s through to the mid 1990s. And so Senator Whish-Wilson was asking the then Chief of Air Force, well, has Australia got a position on UAP? Do we have any reporting protocols in place? And turned out his questions, the answers he got were very much non-answers. It was just, move along. There's nothing to see here. Mm-hmm. And so that really got me going on a bit of a FOIA rampage in Australia. And I wanted to get an understanding as to what the Royal Australian Air Force knew about UAP following the release of ODNI's preliminary assessment, and when it knew it and what it didn't know. And so I was able to secure for release a significant document in It was in May of 2022. It was because the Chief of Air Force at that Senate estimates hearing, which is kind of like a budget estimates or budget oversight hearing that Senator Wish Wilson was asking the Chief of Air Force on. The Chief of Air Force was completely caught off guard with the Senator's questioning. So the Royal Australian Air Force internally thought, well, we better prepare ourselves so that when the next Senate estimates comes round, which would be around about 6 months' time later, the Chief of Air Force is well prepared to answer any questions that maybe that same senator or other senators might ask on UAP. So there was a briefing document that was prepared for the Chief of Air Force on UAP, and it's the most significant document at that time in May 2022 that had come out of the Australian Department of Defence on UAP, because in 1996, the Australian Department of Defence and Royal Australian Air Force basically said, move along, folks, there's nothing to see here. And the Royal Australian Air Force formally ceased its investigation into the UAP topic. It said, we can't find any scientific or other compelling reason to continue to devote resources to the ongoing investigation of UAP. So we're not going to do anything about it anymore. This is, after them having for decades investigated the UAP topic. So this document, was significant, and it kind of it laid out the history of UAP to a degree from what had come out of the ODNI's preliminary assessment. And it really included some talking points for the Chief of Air Force to follow, like a script, if he was going to be asked questions at the Senate estimates. And it also had a section in that document about strategic narrative, which is basically the story that the Royal Australian Air Force wants to sell to the Australian public, the Australian tax-paying public. And that strategic narrative was that UAP is likely to be one of three things. It's either natural or other benign phenomena, it's sensor errors, or it's human-made technology, either foreign adversarial systems or potentially our own technology. There was never any allowance by the Australian Department of Defence and Royal Australian Air Force for that catch-all other bin that the ODNI included in its preliminary assessment on UAP. So the question that I always asked once I received that document and read that strategic narrative is, well, at that time, how is the Royal Australian Air Force able to make a determination as to what UAP are likely to be or not likely to be when it hasn't investigated the topic since 1996, number one? At that point in time, it hadn't received any briefings from the US, the Department of Defense in the States, on UAP. It hadn't even seen any of the classified information that was included in ODNI's preliminary assessment. And in that same document, the Chief of Air Force brief on UAP, it said categorically that Australia has no desire to collaborate with allies on the topic of UAP. So it had absolutely no interest, and it hadn't touched the subject since 1996, yet it was able to make this amazing determination that, move along, folks, there's nothing to see here. And we live in a very different world in 2024 than what we did in 1996. And even 2 years ago, the Australian Department of Defence has changed its position quite significantly on UAP, and we can get into that obviously with the UAP Caucus Working Group. But that's a huge, long-winded answer for you. But that's probably the document that I'm most proud of being able to secure for my fellow Aussies that are interested in this topic and want to get a better understanding as to what the Australian Department of Defence's current position is on the UAP topic.
That's amazing, man. Because, and you take the United States, for example. They said that Project Blue Book was their final look into the topic, their final conclusions, and that they were no longer officially investigating. And then what happens? We learn about ATIP. So it's not until they're backed into a corner that they will finally admit something. So they were probably hoping that people like you would go away and stop inquiring. And, that will bring
100%.
us. Right?
I don't think I don't think the Australian Department of Defence and Royal Australian Air Force envisioned there to be a growing chorus of Aussies like me and others that are even in the chat that take this topic seriously from an Australian perspective. And we want to know why our government is so reluctant and reticent to formally acknowledge that the phenomenon exists, and why it doesn't want to investigate the topic and reach a conclusion as to what it may be. Because the United States Department of Defense and US Congress has said time and time again over the last several years that UAP is not isolated to the United States. It's a global phenomenon, and it represents a clear and present national security threat and safety of flight risk. And for the Australian Department of Defense, and I might say the UK and New Zealand, to be completely ignoring this topic publicly, behind closed doors, I suspect it's a very different conversation, but publicly, they're still continuing towing the same old line that move along, folks. There's nothing to see here. We know what's in our airspace. There's nothing to worry about, which I believe couldn't be further from the truth.
Right. Okay. So closed doors. That's where I want to go next. I want to talk a little about UFOs in Australia a little later, case history and whatnot, Grant. But let's just, while we're at it, let's move to this current document that you received and this group that you were able to find out about that nobody knew about. Closed doors, the Five Eyes. Maybe set that up a little for us, if you don't mind, of what the Five Eyes is, what it represents, what they might be withholding or holding, and then then we can dive into what you were able to uncover about Australia's involvement in all of this. So could you maybe set that up a little for us?
So for the benefit of your audience that don't know, so the Five Eyes is a long-standing intelligence alliance between the United States, Canada, the UK, Australia, and New Zealand, and historically have shared signals intelligence to better understand the threats that each of the Five Eyes member countries are potentially exposed to, how they can mitigate those threats, exploit their strengths, and so on. So it was all about sharing signals intelligence. It's kind of broadened since Five Eyes was kind of implemented as an intelligence alliance. So rewind the clock to the 31st of May of last year, where at NASA's public hearing on UAP, Dr. Sean Kirkpatrick presented, he spoke to the independent study team, and he was asked a question by, I believe it was the chair of the NASA independent study team panel about, well, what is AARO, the All Domain Anomaly Resolution Office, which we know Dr. Sean Kirkpatrick was the director of at the time. The chair of this NASA panel asked, well, what is AARO currently doing with, our allies to better understand the phenomenon? And it was in that moment that Dr. Sean Kirkpatrick revealed to the world that he had just held his inaugural Five Eyes Forum, a meeting or briefing on UAP. And when I first heard that, I was like, holy crap, because Australia has not taken any interest in this topic. And now the US is in potentially holding a meeting, a briefing for all of the Five Eyes partners. So, and to AARO's credit, it was actually doing exactly what it was congressionally mandated to do. The legislation that was passed some years ago, one of the duties of the office that is implemented to investigate UAP, which is currently AARO, one of their duties is to coordinate with allies and international partners of the United States to better understand the nature and extent of UAP. So AARO was doing exactly what it was mandated to do. And it got me thinking, well, if Australia hasn't had really any interest in this topic since 1996, has no current desire to collaborate with allies to better understand the issue, and now it's getting invited by its Five Eyes ally, AUKUS partner, the US ally, for this Five Eyes forum on UAP. That got me very interested. So I submitted a number of both Australian and US Freedom of Information Act requests, and one of them was I submitted a FOIA request to NASA, because at that briefing, Dr. Sean Kirkpatrick, he stated that Dan Evans, who is one of the NASA independent study team members, was in attendance at this Five Eyes forum on UAP, and NASA is subject to FOIA. So I submitted a US Freedom of Information Act request going after emails for Dan Evans pertaining to the Five Eyes forum on UAP. And a couple of months later, I get a FOIA response with some documents that show that Dan Evans did attend the Five Eyes forum on UAP, as did Mark McInerney, who we know is now the NASA's director of UAP research. And that there were a number of redactions that were made in the emails that I got back through FOIA for Dan Evans. And those redactions were referred to the Office of the Undersecretary of Defense, INS, OUSD, INS, for ARO to review and for the initial denial authority to decide if the redactions could be cleared or if they had to stay redacted, if they were revealing sensitive information. So that kind of was the first request. And then it from that stemmed these other documents that I got, which was in June of this year. So only, what's that, last month, it was this meeting agenda for the Five Eyes Forum on UAP, which was officially labeled or identified as not the Five Eyes Forum on UAP, but it was officially named the Five Eyes Inaugural UAP Caucus Working Group. And so its name was officially out there. And in this meeting agenda, which we'll review in just a moment, this is actually, so this meeting agenda came out last month in June. Now, only today, this is kind of an exclusive for your viewers, only today I got response to another Freedom of Information Act request that I submitted in June of last year for emails for Dr. Sean Kirkpatrick pertaining specifically to this Five Eyes Forum on UAP, which we now know is the Five Eyes Inaugural UAP Caucus Working Group. So that's the document that we can walk through now. And if you want to start from the very last document, that's probably a good starting point. So if you whenever you want to scroll down to the very bottom.
The very bottom. Okay. That would be this one here.
Yeah, so I think that's the so that's the last one. Now my eyes, I'm blind as a badger, so I'm going to
let me see if I can make it bigger for you, man, too. This is all new to me.
If you hit at the top of the center top of the page, you got the plus icon. If you hit the plus, you should be able to.
Yep.
Perfect.
There we go.
So, and what's interesting, just for the before we review this document, what's interesting for your non-Australian audience is that Senator Wish Wilson, who I have a relationship with, and I've apprised him of updates on UAP, and basically based on what I've found through FOIA in both the US and Australia. And so Senator Wish Wilson, once he caught wind of the fact that there was this Five Eyes Forum on UAP that happened in May of last year, he submitted written questions on notice to the Australian Department of Defence saying, did Australia attend this Five Eyes Forum? Did Australia attend a United States briefing on UAPs? And in July of last year, the Australian Department of Defence responded to the Senator's question in writing saying, no, Australia did not attend a United States briefing on UAP, which was extremely odd to me. Why would Australia not attend a briefing that its US ally has invited it to attend to talk about the national security, threat, safety, or flight risk that UAP pose? So the senator wasn't satisfied with that response. So he submitted some months later a follow-up written question on notice, and I actually authored this question for the senator to submit. I proposed questions that he submit. And the question that was asked of the Australian Department of Defence on the 2nd of November of last year was verbatim, did Australia receive an invitation to attend ARA's Five Eyes Forum on UAP in May 2023? If it did, if so, why did it not accept the invitation? On what grounds did it not accept the invitation? And at that point, a month later, on the 15th of December, the Australian Department of Defence came back and did a 180-degree backflip admission and said, oh, yes, no, a defense representative at the Australian Embassy in Washington, D.C. did attend. So they couldn't organize a piss up in a brewery and figure out if they'd attended or not attended. There's just this complete lack of transparency and confusion. And so this document that came out last month, which is an extension, this is an extension of that document, it shows categorically that all of the Five Eyes members were invited to attend this Five Eyes UAP Caucus Working Group meeting and share intelligence and information on UAP. And that kind of can lead into, I guess, this document.
Cool. Wow. Yeah, it's stunning, man. Yeah, it's like, oh, Oh yeah, we just so happened to have a representative in the U.S. They were there on vacation, so they just snuck into the meeting, and that was
So it's so
crazy.
so either, I mean, Ross Coulthard always says we'll always assume a screw up before a conspiracy. So it could have just been that they are incompetent and they didn't do their homework and do due diligence and ask around, or there was some level of deception played, when they said no, we didn't attend, not thinking that someone like me and Senator Wish Wilson would be doing our due diligence and following up on this. So they kind of got caught red-handed and red-faced, having to make this admission that they did attend. So this document that I received today is part of, it's an email chain. It's emails from and to Dr. Sean Kirkpatrick. And I think it's the first documents we've actually seen to date through FOIA that have actually been directly from or to Dr. Sean Kirkpatrick. So this last email, you can see this is on the 17th of May. This is a week before the Five Eyes inaugural UAP caucus working group meeting. So if you scroll to the very bottom, it's basically just saying, please, I'm blind as a badger. I have to put.
No, I got you, brother. Please extend an invitation in supporting logistics for our Five Eyes meeting next week to redacted. They should already have their clearances permcerted here, but double check with redacted. We are holding it here and not the Pentagon. Correct.
And that's from, and I just found it funny as to how he signs off, Dr. K.
Dr. K.
Yeah. So that's from Kirkpatrick a week prior to this Five Eyes meeting. So if you now go up the page to the next document, it's basically revealing that if you scroll down a bit further, might be at the top of the next. Is it that one? Or maybe, sorry, go down. What's on the next page? The top of the next page.
The top of
the last page. Sorry,
the last page.
Yeah. Is there anything at the top of that, or have we already?
No.
Oh yeah. Sorry. Yeah. So now scrolling up. Scroll your way up. So keep going because that's the second page of that email chain. Keep going up. So this is now the document that is the interesting one. So this was if you scroll up a little bit further, you'll have the send date. So this was on less than a week after Kirkpatrick sent that email. This is on May 23rd, a day before this Five Eyes UAP inaugural UAP caucus working group meeting. It says, Dr. K, below is the updated agenda for the Five Eyes meeting tomorrow. Attached is the list of attendees outside of our office. The briefing is essentially the same as the GIS SRC, which I believe is significant, and we'll touch on that in a moment. However, redacted will be there to speak specific concerning their areas. And then it kind of goes into below what the agenda is for this briefing. It's basically saying who's going to be in attendance. So it's not just representatives from ARO, it's also a representative for the ODNI, from the FAA, NASA, and all of the Five Eyes partners. What the intention is behind the meeting, basically where it's going to be held and so on. So you can see it's basically an all-day meeting that was scheduled to be had, and there's a significant number of people that are attending this meeting. One of the other documents that is with this release is a separate document that's completely redacted. I'm not sure if you saw that in the email.
Yeah, let me pull that up. I mean, there's not much to show,
It's
but
ridiculous.
it goes to show, like, the old Stanton Friedman thing. Like, you get a document
exactly
and the entire
right.
thing's blacked out.
So the other document is just a one-pager, but it's completely redacted, and it's the attendee list. So we don't know how exhaustive the attendee list is in terms of the name of the person, their title, their number, a bio on them. It could be an incredibly long list of attendees, or it could be 10 to 12 people. But if you take into consideration on this agenda document, everyone that it's disclosed as will be represented at this meeting, there's potentially a significant number of people that are going to be in the room. And so it's got this agenda, 7:45, check in at the Pentagon, get your visitor's badge. This meeting was a top secret /SCI meeting, so we can assume that it was going to be held in a SCIF, which means you can't take in your mobile phone, you can't take any electronics with you. 8:30 to 8:45, administrative remarks and introductions. Everyone, kind of does around the table. 8:45 to 10 a.m. So for an hour and 15 minutes, you've got Dr. Kirkpatrick doing a welcoming address and providing US updates on UAP efforts. So ARO's operations, its analysis to date, strategic comms, an update from the FAA, an update from NASA, NIM, which is the National Intelligence Manager for Aviation, who we all know put that UFO image on their logo. Remember that controversy?
Oh my gosh. I almost
some time
forgot
back?
about that.
Yeah, that's right. And
It
then
was a weird day.
NIM-M, which is National Intelligence Manager for Maritime. So you've got this kind of all-day agenda. If you scroll on down to the next page, this is where it gets interesting for those of us outside of the US. We've got a break, morning tea break, then 10:15 to 11:30. So for an hour and 15 minutes, FVEY, which is an acronym for Five Eyes, Five Eyes Partner Updates. Australia's first cab off the rank. Canada, the UK, and New Zealand. So each Five Eyes partner was given a decent chunk of time to present to everyone in attendance at this working group meeting about what its country is doing currently on UAP, what intelligence it's collected, provide intelligence sharing with the US. So it begs the question, well, what was Australia able to bring to the table and add to the discussion if it hasn't done anything since 1996 and it's got no current recording and reporting protocols in place for the Australian Defence Force on UAP? But why I think Australia probably had something of significance to present is I can say with a high degree of confidence that the Australian representative that attended this Five Eyes Forum on UAP was more than likely a representative of the Defence Intelligence Organization, which is exempt from FOIA. And so I suspect, as do a lot of my other colleagues, that the Australian intelligence services, namely the Defence Intelligence Organization, knows a hell of a lot more about UAP than the Australian Defence Force services do, like the Army, the Navy, the Defence Space Command, and the Royal Australian Air Force. And I don't think they've been sharing intelligence all that well, keeping the Royal Australian Air Force apprised of what Australia has been doing in terms of its engagement with the US on UAP. We know that Canada is taking UAP more seriously than Australia, the UK, and New Zealand. Not as seriously as the US, but it's got its own efforts, Sky Project Canada. And the UK has been very mum on the topic as well. It hasn't wanted to talk about it, as has New Zealand. So I'm really interested to learn, well, what did Australia, the UK, and New Zealand have to bring to the table at that Five Eyes forum? And, that went for an hour and 15 minutes. Then there's a lunch break where it wasn't hosted by ARO. Everyone had to head on down to the food court in the Pentagon to buy their own lunch. And before that, there was some discussions on Five Eyes UAP collaboration, a way ahead plan. So an action plan for what we should all do collectively as Five Eyes members going forward. And then they would have, some more discussions in the afternoon about future way ahead plans. So, without laboring the point, it really is an interesting document because it shows without any ambiguity whatsoever that each of the Five Eyes member countries did attend this UAP caucus working group meeting, the first of, I suspect, many. And we don't know what ARO's schedule is on future engagements, but we now know that there is formal engagement and intelligence sharing across the Five Eyes to help ARO achieve its mission of better understanding the nature and extent of UAP, and for the other countries, Australia, Canada, UK, and New Zealand, to learn from ARO and maybe get off its ass and start taking the topic seriously as well in each of their home countries.
So it's so telling. I mean, the fact that Australia wasn't only present, but did share information of some sort. I mean, how do we get that, Grant? I mean, what I'm sort of imagining is you look at something like how, and politics aside, you look at what Burchett did at that hearing with I think it was like the Secretary of the Department of Energy or someone representing the Department of Energy. And I mean, honestly, he burned her. We had to subpoena you to come here and talk anything about UAP. and you guys never share any of your information with Aero because you're quote unquote exempt. And if we are to assume that whoever Australia's representative was who shared information is also exempt from things like FOIA and what you have in Australia, do you think we have any hope of ever getting the information that they shared, or how do we even begin to approach something like that?
It's a great question. So your average Joe like me and others in Australia that want to know what Australia contributed to this Five Eyes Forum, we've probably got none and Buckley's chance of ever finding that out. However, those that have a better chance of being privy to that information are our elected representatives, if they have the necessary clearances and need to know. So Senator Wish Wilson is much more better positioned to find out than I am what Australia contributed to that Five Eyes Forum, because he's a participating member of the Senate estimates for the Defence, Foreign Affairs and Trade portfolio. And so he would be in a position to use some of his authority as a participating member on that for that portfolio to find out to what extent, I'm not sure, but he would be able to at least get some briefing or some information on Australia's engagement and potentially what information it shared with ARO at that forum. So unfortunately, that's the thing that's frustrating, is because the intelligence services are all exempt from Foreign Australia, your average Joe is never going to know what's going on behind closed doors. And look, I get it, rightly so. You know, when there are things pertaining to national security interest and international relations, I get it. I understand why the intelligence services have information that's classified and so on. But if there's nothing to the UAP UFO topic, if it is all as ARO positions it as at the moment, that it's all misidentification, it's all drone technology, it's all balloons, it's our own technology that's classified that people are identifying, misinterpreting as UAP. If there's nothing to it, why are the highest levels of classification and security being placed on the UAP topic? You know, one of the couple of the acronyms that are in that email, there's a reference to TS, which is top secret. There's a reference to SI, which is sensitive information. There's reference to TK, which is an acronym for what's called talent keyhole. And anyone that's watched Ross Coulthardt's most recent Need to Know with Bryce Zabel, you know, he talked about this document that I was able to secure for release. And talent keyhole is one of it's all about as it's relevant to the Five Eyes. It's all applicable to satellite imagery, satellite data, and so on. So you have basically, top secret, sensitive intelligence, talent keyhole relevant to the Five Eyes is about as high as it gets for intelligence sharing across the Five Eyes. So why is UAP being given this such a high classification, top secret, special compartment information, and so on, if there's nothing to the topic? Now, it could be that it's all of the sensor equipment that ARO is working on with it's currently working on a Gremlin asset system to help sensor system to better identify UAP, and all of the other current classified sensors that maybe the other armed services are using. Maybe that's why it's all classified, because of the actual sensor technology. But it still begs the question, if you've got, the UAP UFO topic is there's really nothing to it, then why have you got all these levels of classification? And to this date, we're really yet to see very little photographic and visual evidence from ARO as to any of these cases that they've resolved. I mean, look, in February of 2023, when the Chinese spy balloon was shot down and those 3 still unidentified aerial objects were shot down by the US Air Force, the Pentagon is quick to release a photo from the U-2 Dragon Lady, the U-2 spy plane, from the cockpit of the Chinese spy balloon, right. And it's quick to release, Reaper MQ-9 footage of the Russian fighter jets dousing fuel on the Reaper drones, but it hasn't released any footage pertaining to those still 3 unidentified aerial objects that are shot down. So if we can't get any information, visual, photographic, video evidence on those 3 things that were potentially prosaic, what chance have we got on getting anything that we can sink our teeth in, photographic or video, on UAP that ARO is looking at? Only the breadcrumbs that they throw our way when they consider a case closed, and they've kind of sanitized it, scrapped of any classified information. That's what's incredibly frustrating. So I unfortunately don't think that we, the general public, are ever going to be privy to, we'll get maybe scraps from ARO and through FOIA as to what's going on behind the scenes. We'll never get a full picture of the puzzle. We're just given puzzle pieces. And that's what's frustrating.
It is. And, to this day, it frustrates me that we still are no closer in the public of knowing what those shootdowns were. I do want to touch on that briefly, Grant, because you also did a video, and we will link your videos in the show notes. I do have the UAP caucus working group video in the show notes, guys, so be sure to go watch that. Grant goes much more in depth on all of that. But when it comes to those shootdowns, Grant, like we talked about what information is shared and what isn't. Do you think any of the Five Eyes know what those shootdowns were or weren't? I'm pretty confident that the U.S. knows what they were. Actually, I got to be careful how I word that. I think they know what it was and what it wasn't. I guess would be a better way of putting that. But do you think Australia has any idea what those shootdowns were or weren't?
So we have to kind of speculate if those 3 unidentified aerial objects were prosaic, then yes, I would say without doubt that Australia, Canada, the UK, and New Zealand know exactly what those 3 unidentified aerial objects were. And I was able, and I covered this as you mentioned, in the live stream that I did back in when was it last month? Yeah, last month was on the shootdown. What Australia knows about the shootdown of the Chinese spy balloon and 3 unidentified aerial objects. And I was able to secure for release through the Australian Freedom of Information Act a document that an email chain, and this was in the days immediately after those 3 unidentified aerial objects were shot down. And the Royal Australian Air Force, the Chief of Air Force, had requested a formal briefing from the US Department of Defense via the Australian Air Attaché in Washington, D.C., requested information and a briefing on the shootdown so it could understand, for the benefit of Australia's defense, the identity of those objects. So that's a giveaway right there. The source of the objects, another giveaway, and what Australia could gain from the learnings, understand anything from the US's response to those incidents. So what could Australia learn from how the US responded, basically? And so I was able to secure for release through Australian FOIA an email chain, which clearly has correspondence going back and forth between those in senior positions of leadership in the Royal Australian Air Force and other agencies. And in this email chain, it's heavily redacted due to exemption S7, which is information within the holdings of an intelligence agency, like, for example, Defense Intelligence Organization. And it also had significant redactions under exemption S33A 2 and 3, which is national security, as well as potential harm to international relations with an ally like the United States if that information was disclosed. So I 100% believe that Australia knows exactly what those objects were if they were all prosaic in nature. If they weren't all prosaic in nature, there has been murmurs that the object that was shot at over Dead Horse, Alaska, may not have been prosaic. To what extent the Five Eyes know everything about that encounter, I don't know, but it makes sense that if RO is trying to get to the bottom of the UAP issue, and it wants to learn from its allies, and it wants its allies to learn from the United States in an effort to broaden the security of the Five Eyes Intelligence Alliance, overall, then it would make sense that if RO is privy to information about the shoot down of those 3 unidentified aerial objects, which we know from Kirkpatrick's testimony in Congress in April of last year when he testified before Gillibrand, that his office, RO, had some level of involvement or participation in the shoot down events. So I suspect if RO is privy to that information, then it's more than likely been shared at the Five Eyes level. If it is UAP, if it's unidentified that they're dealing with, but if it's simply prosaic, yeah, you can bet your bottom dollar that the Five Eyes, all of them know about it and they know what it is. But for us, average Joe in the public, I don't think we're ever going to know unless the White House decides to be transparent, as it promised it would, and reveal what those objects are. I don't think it ever will, because I think that was such a massive embarrassment for the Biden administration that they don't want to talk about it. They just don't want to touch it.
Absolutely. And God, that Dead Horse Alaska one, man, it keeps gripping my curiosity. I should mention, I did speak to a resident that lives very close to Dead Horse who claimed that he did see the recovery efforts of material shot down.
Right.
Now, we were told that they never recovered anything, that the climate was just too rough and they weren't able to get to any of it, but that they did shoot something down. This witness told me, I saw it. I saw them put stuff on flatbeds and in, one of those big aircraft that flies other aircraft, that they put it into there and they carted it away. Again, this is one man's word. I was supposed to be going to Dead Horse to actually investigate this. Those plans, unfortunately, have fallen apart for the time being. But stay tuned. You never know what can happen. But yeah, I was happy to get your thoughts on all of that, because I think the UAP shootdown thing just came and went, and everyone just kind of gave up on it. But it's clear that there's still things to be gleaned from that.
Absolutely, and there's still so much more that we only get breadcrumbs on a lot of these things, and we want to know so much more. And to go back to that document that you showed on screen just very briefly to kind of hit home the point, in that email chain, I don't know if you're able to bring that back up, just so I can
give me 1 sec.
Mention it.
Get that for you here. The beauty of live streaming. Apologies, Grant. 1 sec.
No, that's all good, because this is what I find is interesting about that document. And, for those that haven't seen this document, they'll find it interesting. But for me, that's, saw the meeting agenda and schedule of RO's meeting last month, and now to see this extended commentary, this is what I find interesting. So if you just zoom in on the first paragraph that's in bold. So if you zoom on in, so you can see there, it says the second sentence says this briefing is essentially the same as the GIS SRC. Now, I had no idea when I received this FOIA document earlier today what the GIS SRC is. So I reached out to a few trusted sources, and they were able to offer some suggestions. And it quite possibly could stand for an acronym for Global Intelligence, Surveillance, and Reconnaissance Capability. Now, that is, with the United States Navy in the early 2000s. And essentially, one of my trusted sources, why they think this is significant is because it seems to fit perfectly with the context of UAP and obviously the Five Eyes. Now, it's an old acronym. The term Global Intelligence, Surveillance, and Reconnaissance Capability is from the 2000s, and the US DoD changed their acronyms all the time. So it's interesting that there's an old acronym that's been referenced in this email. But what my trusted source found interesting is that if this is what that acronym GISRC represents, this global intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance capability, it's interesting because it seems to indicate that the GISRC tasking is responsible for UAP detection and reporting. So in which case, if this is the same as the 20-year-old reference to GIS RC, then the GISRC has potentially been tasked with UAP detection for at least, if not all of those 20 years. So that's a breadcrumb. That's a huge breadcrumb for potentially the likes of someone like John Greenwald Jr., who can now go after documents pertaining to ARO's briefing, with or at this relevant to the SRC, and see what other information that reveals. And that's why FOIA is of significant value. It won't ever give you all pieces of the puzzle, but it will give you breadcrumbs to other pieces of other puzzles. And that's why I really advocate for what John does and has been doing for several decades, because without something like FOIA and folks like John Greenwald Jr. going after it, we wouldn't know nearly as much as we currently do on the UAP topic. We would rely purely on anecdotal evidence from what we hear from subject matter experts, if there are any in the space, that come on podcasts and so on. So FOIA is the official government record that you can take to the bank and say, well, this is an official document of the US government. Now, is the contents of the document accurate and truthful? That's sometimes always debatable, but it's an official record of the United States government. And that's why I think it's important, because we can take that as the official position of the United States government and use it to reveal breadcrumbs to other pieces of the puzzle.
Absolutely. Those breadcrumbs lead to something. They always do.
Hopefully. I mean, and unfortunately, I don't think, we're never going to be in a position where we'll get, I don't think, some paradigm shifting document or disclosure through FOIA. It's only ever going to, reveal bits and pieces of information of a much broader picture. And that's why I think it's important that folks that take this topic seriously do engage their elected representatives so that they can help inform the thinking of the likes of Luna, Burchett, Moskovich, and others, Gillibrand, who want to advocate for their constituents and what's important to them. So, I mean, you've now got a chorus of US congressmen and congresswomen that are taking the topic more seriously today than they ever have, and a lot more people talking about it. Now, one could argue, well, have they been successful in being able to bring more information to the table? Well, I would say they have, because David Grush and his explosive testimony before the House Oversight Committee in July of last year, alongside David Fravor and Ryan Graves. Now, we, the general public, can't verify any of the information that David Grush testified to, but you would want to hope that there are folks within Congress that have the necessary clearances and need to know that they can hopefully, at some point, start digging in and getting to the bottom of it. And we know that the Intelligence Community Inspector General has taken David Grush's reprisal complaint. And we know from Dr. Sean Kirkpatrick's own mouth, with his recent great interview with that Marek von Rennenkamp did, that ARO was privy to the information in David Grush's ICIG complaint that did not pertain to reprisals. So all of the claims that David Grush has made against him interviewing 40 witnesses, some of them primary witnesses, about this crash retrieval and your legacy crash retrieval reverse engineering program. Well, Kirkpatrick is saying ARO is privy to all of that information. Now, he's saying that, no, it didn't reveal anything new. Well, that's ARO's position. It would be interesting to learn what the official findings are of the ICIG and what other men and women within Congress can get to the bottom of in due course. Because unfortunately, the House Oversight Committee has still not heard David Grush's classified testimony. They don't have the necessary clearances to hear his classified testimony in a SCIF. Then that's the problem with the House Oversight Committee trying to, push for answers from David Grush. They just are not going to, at the moment, get him in a SCIF. And I know there have been conversations for a while now that, well, maybe what the House Oversight Committee has to do is form this Senate Select Committee on UAP, where it can get the necessary read-ins, one-time read-ins or clearances, and get subpoena authority to actually compel witnesses to come before Congress and testify about what they knew about these claims, these explosive claims of legacy crash retrieval and reverse engineering programs. So, it's an ongoing marathon that we're kind of all, plodding our way through to try and see if we can get closer to the finish line and get some answers. So it's an ongoing effort.
Yeah. And so is the investigation, by the Attorney General. So we have to keep that in mind too as we move forward. Like, this isn't done. It feels like kind of a lull right now with the whole David Grush thing. Everyone's like, I want to hear from the witnesses. I want to hear more. Where's this expose this dude was supposed to write? There is an ongoing investigation. So I can imagine it's tough right now. I do take some comfort in knowing that Arrow did speak with the 40 witnesses, or at least some of them, that Grush claims to have spoken with as well. But like you said, they kind of came back and said, yeah, we spoke to him. Nothing new. That's Arrow's word. So I'm glad you brought that up. So who knows, man? Who knows?
I mean, you don't know who to believe too, because the whole intention behind making a protected disclosure that David Grush made, and presumably the 40 witnesses that he interviewed, those of them that made also a protected disclosure to the ICIG. Well, that's under the Whistleblower Protection Act, or the protected disclosure for whistleblowers, the identity of the individual is not to be disclosed to anyone other than the ICIG. So I don't believe ARO would actually know the identity of those 40 witnesses that David Grush interviewed that then went to the ICIG to provide their firsthand evidence. So and David Grush, I believe, it was through Marek von Rennenkampf, I believe, made a statement that he is of the understanding that only, I believe, 3 of the 40 witnesses that he interviewed went to ARO. So what about all of the other 37 witnesses that he interviewed? Has ARO not even been privy to any of their testimony? If not, how can ARO, have this position that, well, yeah, there's, we talked to everyone, we're able to cross-reference it with, other known SAPs and all of the information that we're able to get our hands on, because we don't have any. We've got all the necessary authorities that we need to get information from the IC, the intelligence community, and so on. But you haven't spoken to all of the witnesses that David Grush interviewed. And if some of those remaining 37 witnesses have firsthand knowledge, as David Grush testified to in July of last year, then that still leaves a big question mark, I believe,
right,
on the whole thing.
Absolutely. A question mark remains, my friend. Grant, look, I want to take a quick break, if that's okay with you. And what I want to talk about on the other side here with you is a couple Australian UFO cases, one of which I know you're very familiar with, one of which I find of great interest. And then I also want to break down a little bit the documentary series that you were a part of over there in Australia as well. So, guys, stick with us. We're going to take a quick Patreon message break, and we will be right back on the other side with our favorite Australian UFO researcher, Grant Lavac. Stay tuned, guys. We'll see you on the other side. The Somewhere in the Skies podcast is free to listen to every week, but if you would like to help support the show, we have a very active Patreon page where you give what you think the show is worth. In return, you'll get early access to the main show, bonus episodes, and priority to ask our guests your listener questions. Your support truly makes the show continue and grow. So, to learn more and to join, visit patreon.com/somewhereskies. All right, and welcome back, guys, to Somewhere in the Skies. If you're just joining us, we are with Grant Lavac, and we just covered a lot. So be sure to check it out. If you're just joining us, it will be in the archives in perpetuity. And this episode will also be available on the main podcast feed for next week's Somewhere in the Skies podcast. So, Grant, shifting gears a little bit, as they say. I want to talk UFOs in Australia, some of the case history that we do have out of your neck of the woods. And probably the most visible one out there right now is the Westall incident. I know you've spoken at length on other shows about this, but you had a very unique opportunity, unlike many others who just know about the case, to actually meet with some of the witnesses of this event. So, would you mind telling us a little about what the event was in Westall back in 1966? Was it? Want to make sure I have the year right.
Sixth of April, 1966, and every country, or maybe not every country, but many countries have their, for a lack of a better word, Roswell, and this is really Australia's most significant, still unresolved cold case that continues to linger to this day. So on the 6th of April, 1966, at a school called Westall High School, which is about 45 minutes kind of southeasterly from Melbourne Airport, which is where I'm kind of located. So about 45 minutes from me. At recess, so approximately 10:20 in the morning on the 6th of April 1966. This is, I believe, the second last day of term before school breaks up for the Easter break. At a few minutes before the recess bell rings at 10:20, a school girl, a student, bursts into a classroom, a science class, and yells out to the teacher, Mr. Greenwood, there is flying saucer. There's flying saucers outside, or something to that effect. And there was this, when the recess bell goes a few minutes later, there's this massive commotion, and there's this huge exodus of children running out into the sports oval, where and it's reported that several hundred children witnessed something anomalous flying in the sky, or hovering and flying in the sky above their school. Many of the children recall it resembled an object that was flying saucer in shape. It's not entirely clear as to how many objects were seen. There are reports there was one. There are other reports that it was upwards of three. But many, many hundreds of children saw something that they could not readily identify in the skies above their school on the 6th of April, 1966. And after some time, it was reported that this object that resembled a flying saucer moved position, made its way to the south end of the school, and continued for about a mile south of the school to a densely wooded area that was called the Grange, where a lot of the high school students would actually frequent for their cross-country runs. So many of the school students knew this Grange area, and a number of the students ran to this Grange area, followed what was observed as resembling a flying saucer to this area. And it's hard to corroborate a lot of the testimony from the witnesses that reported that they saw this flying saucer in the Grange area. Either it was reported to have landed or come into close contact with the ground in the Grange area. And this is 58 years ago, and 58 years later, it still remains as much of an unresolved mystery as it did on that day. And you have reports of the military rocking up at the school later in the day with trucks and jeeps in military attire, uniforms. That there were people military seen to have cordoned off an area near the Grange and reportedly had devices in their possession that resembled Geiger counters and metal detectors and these sorts of things. And there were allegedly reported to be soil samples that were taken off-site by the military, and who knows what was done with them. And the children were told to shut up about the event. There was this special assembly that was convened by the headmaster later that day, where the school children were told, you are not to talk about what you've seen today. You're to shut up about it. It's not something that needs to be ever discussed again. And it's not just the children that observed this anomalous object or objects resembling a flying saucer in the sky above their school. There was also potentially 2 teachers. One of them was a gentleman by the name of Andrew Greenwood, who was 20 years of age on the day of the incident. And he was the science teacher who this schoolgirl burst in his room and said, Mr. Greenwood, there's a flying saucer. And so he went out into the sports ground and he observed something anomalous in the sky above the school. Now, he never testified, or his recollection was that it didn't resemble a flying saucer to him, but different times that the thing were identified or seen, different locations, different people seeing, everyone is different. How we see and process things might be different as well. But there's also another teacher who was reported to have seen objects in the sky above the school, and she had a camera, and it was alleged that she took a camera and photographed what was in the sky above Westall High School. And like with any great UFO story or account, when the military and allegedly government officials rocked up on site, that camera was confiscated. It was taken and it never saw the light of day. And you even had the local news team, Channel 9 news team, come to the school in the afternoon before the day is out and interview a number of these children that were primary witnesses and saw something earlier that day. And it was on the I think the 6 o'clock or 7 o'clock, the evening news that day. There was a report on Channel 9, which is one of our leading stations in Australia, about this incident. And as it would be with any good UFO case, that report has also mysteriously vanished and never seen the light of day. Now, it could have been that footage, the reel from that report, was just destroyed. There were poor retention, fire retention policies, that sort of thing. But, it's just... And what's unfortunate about the Westall flying saucer incident is that 58 years later, there has not yet been any official documentation that's seen the light of day through FOIA, through the National Archives of Australia. There's never been any official explanation given by the Australian government, the Australian Department of Defence, about what it was that was responsible for what was seen above the Westall High School that day and was reported to have landed or come into close proximity with the ground at the Grange. And this is despite the fact that it's long been suggested that the now defunct Department of Supply apparently compiled a comprehensive report, investigated the Westall flying saucer incident, and compiled a comprehensive report. And wouldn't you know it, 58 years later, that report has never seen the light of day. So either it's been destroyed or it's been buried somewhere, and it just has never come to light through the National Archives of Australia. And folks like me and others that have done far greater work researching the Westall flying saucer incident, like Keith Basterfield, Bill Chalker, Ross Coulthard, and even Shane Ryan, who's, I would say, has probably been one of the lead researchers on the Westall incident. He he was involved in a great documentary a number of years ago now called Westall 66, a suburban UFO mystery, which your viewers can find on YouTube if they're interested to watch it. And what got me interested in the Westall incident is someone had suggested it to me because I had moved to Melbourne. I now live in Melbourne. And so I reached out to Shane Ryan and just asked him some preliminary questions about Westall. And he said to me that, maybe you should think about getting down to the Grange, because once a year, a small number of the primary witnesses, who are all in their 60s and 70s now, they get together once a year for a witness reunion event. And obviously they stopped doing that over COVID because we weren't allowed to go anywhere. But last year, April of 2023, was the first time that they had done it after a number of years. And so I thought, I'm going to get along to it. I'll take my iPhone with me in case maybe a few folks are happy for me to ask some questions and get them on camera. And to my surprise and delight, there were about 5 primary witnesses there on the day, and all of them were very willing to and generous and giving of their time and open to me asking questions and to go on camera. And I ended up collecting a couple of hours of footage just on my iPhone that I thought, I've got some really great long form responses from some of these primary witnesses on what they recall and recollect from the day. It would be wonderful to put this in some form of documentary if I can, and showcase their testimony, based on questions I was asking and just what they remember of the day. And that kind of was what spawned this documentary, almost 90-minute documentary that I was able to put together, really profiling the testimony of 5 of these primary witnesses and walking the viewer through an overview of the Westall incident and some of the prosaic explanations that have been put forward to date as hypotheses. But 58 years later, the Westall incident, we're no closer to getting to the truth as to what it was that was observed in the skies above Westall High School that day and at the densely wooded area of the Grange. So it's just a truly fascinating case. I wasn't able to attend the Westall Witness Reunion event earlier this year in April, and it had a much bigger turnout than the year prior. So hopefully I'll get a chance to go next year and just get along, and it's an opportunity to meet some new folks on the day as well. But yeah, truly fascinating case that James Fox even documented in The Phenomenon that he put out in 2020. So anyone that has seen The Phenomenon may recall that. If you haven't seen it, definitely recommend you give it a good watch. So it's truly fascinating, unresolved cold case to this day.
Yeah, I love that case, man. And guys, go watch Grant's video, because you also get to see him sink a 40-foot putt on the 9th hole on the back 9. No, I'm just kidding, man. It was so cool to see you in your golf gear and everything in that video too, buddy.
It cost me a bomb to play on that course too, because there's a golf course that's adjacent to where it was alleged the flying saucer landed. So I wanted to get out there and not only have a round, but see what it could potentially have looked like through the vantage point of golfers on the day, because it's long been talked about that there were golfers on the 8th hole of the Spring Valley Golf Course that saw something descend from the skies above the Grange and come down. So, and that's what's fascinating about Westall. It's not just the school children that witnessed something. It's also a number of teachers, at least one for sure, with Andrew Greenwood. You have a market gardener whose name is Paul Smith, who I interviewed in the documentary. He was 16 years of age on the day that it happened, and he wasn't a student. He was working in the market gardens adjacent to this densely wooded area of the Grange. You have another school student by the name of Dee Sadake, who was a student of another school several miles away, and on her morning tea break, she saw something in the distance that banked and resembled a flying saucer. And you have members of the general public, including potentially golfers, that saw something as well. So, you have a myriad of different witnesses from all walks of life and all backgrounds that saw something that they couldn't necessarily explain on the day. And what frustrates so many of the primary witnesses, certainly ones that I spoke to and interviewed in April of last year, is to this day, what frustrates them the most is they were told to shut up about it. They were told not to talk about it. And if it was something that was so prosaic, you would think that 58 years later, there would be some documentation or some official explanation as to what it was. But to this day, there's nothing, and they're miffed that they were told not to talk about it. And that's not just the students as well. Andrew Greenwood, the teacher, he had members of military men in military attire rock up at his home, his private residence, unannounced and unwelcome, knocking on his door, and basically laying a veiled threat on him and saying, "You're not to talk about what you saw on that day at Westall High School, because if you do, it will be very easy for people to make an assumption that you were drunk on the day that it happened, and you might lose your job." So he was given a veiled threat. Why, if it was something prosaic, are people being told to shut up about it? And I don't know what it was that was seen above the in the skies above Westall. I would love to know, and more importantly, I would love to know why they were told to shut up about it.
Yeah. Why did they go to such great lengths? I agree with you. Well, Grant, there have been many cases there have been many cases about UFOs in Australia that a lot of people don't know about. I covered, the Knoll family incident that occurred, where the family was lifted in their car by a
Yeah.
UFO, dropped back down. There was physical trace evidence left behind on the car of what had happened. Crazy case. In my most current book, I have a case by Dalen, one of our regulars here at Somewhere in the Skies, who, while working in the military in the outback, had a crazy close encounter incident happen to them as well. But I'd like to know from you, do you have a favorite Australian UFO case that besides Westall,
Yeah.
obviously being one of the most out in the forefront? Yeah, do you have a favorite case?
Definitely Westall is by far my the one I'm most intrigued by and interested, because I've done so much research and homework on it, and only dived down a couple of rabbit holes. I mean, there are so many other layers to the Westall incident, which I won't get into. But I mean, I only touched on such a small part of it based on the testimony of a small number of primary witnesses. And there are a number of other fascinating cases throughout Australia's history. I mean, one that is another famous case in Victoria, Australia, where I currently live, is another one that I've kind of dived into, not nearly as extensively as the Westall incident, but there was a young pilot by the name of Frederick Valentic, who in 1978 was flying a light aircraft, a Cessna, around or above Cape Otway, which is kind of south of Melbourne, and he reported to Melbourne Air Traffic Control that he was observing some very strange lights, moving around and hovering around his aircraft. And unfortunately, Frederick Valentic lost his life. His plane vanished. It either crashed and was never recovered, and his body was never recovered, and his light aircraft was never recovered in its entirety. There were some debris of a light aircraft that was found several years later that some have suggested may have been a part of the Cessna that Frederick Valentic flew, but it's never been verified. And what is so incredibly chilling about the Frederick Valentic case is this comprehensive back and forth radio transmission between Frederick Valentic, this young pilot, and this gentleman at Air Traffic Control Melbourne. And to this day, this happened in 1978, a year before I was born, or some months. It was in October. What was it? October 1978. I was born on 1st of January 79, so a couple of months before I was born. And the radio transmission between Valentic and the air traffic controller is truly chilling. Now, there are a number of recreations that have been put out on YouTube and social media, because the real recording has never seen the light of day. Now, it's out there. I know it's out there because I've actually heard it. I've listened to it. I know a number of
Really?
researchers, and I have a network of folks that have been privy to that recording, and they were kind enough to play it for me. And it's actually 19 minutes long. The recreations that are out there in the public domain are only a couple of they're a couple of minutes long, these recreations. And what isn't out in the public domain at the moment, I believe the actual Frederick Valentic radio transmissions are out there in YouTube, but what is not out there is the real transmission from the air traffic controller. So, and that's what makes it even more chilling when you actually listen to not just what Frederick Valentic is saying with his transmissions, but what you're also hearing from this male air traffic controller. And one of the reasons that's been put forward that the recording has never seen the light of day is that because someone lost their life, for a recording to be for there to be an unauthorized release or disclosure of a recording that has someone that lost their life, there are some legalities around that which could be problematic for the individual that was to disclose it or release it unauthorized. So that's what I've been made to understand is one of the reasons why it's never been released. But there are, copies that are circulating around a number of researchers. And when I heard what was reported to me as this is the real recording, and I had no reason to doubt that it wasn't the real recording, when you listen to Valentic's transmission coupled with the commentary and the transmission from the air traffic controller, it's just truly chilling. And what is really chilling the most, for anyone that's listened to the recording, they will know, but for those that haven't, the very last words that Frederick Valentic says in his radio transmission is, "It's not an aircraft." So what he's looking at is he's not identifying it as an aircraft. And then immediately after he says those words, there are these funny metallic sounds that come through the transmission to the air traffic controllers end. And some have suggested that is that engagement with whatever it is he was observing, or is it some form of engine failure? There have been some explanations put forward as to what may have happened to Frederick Valentic, but some of them are laughable. One of them was that Valentic was disorientated. He was actually flying inverted, upside down, and he didn't know it. But I don't think that's a valid argument, because when you're upside down and you're trying to talk, you don't sound the same. And Valentic was coming across as very calm, collected. He didn't sound impeded in his ability to talk. There are other explanations saying he was drunk, that he just he got lost, disorientated with the atmospheric conditions, but it was apparently great flying conditions. There was no impediments to visibility or anything like that. So it's just a truly fascinating case that, again, is an unresolved cold case. And, just listening, when I listened to the recording, when it was played for me, I closed my eyes and I just listened to what I was hearing. And it's just truly chilling, to immerse yourself in what Valentic, he's very calm throughout it. He doesn't lose his cool. He's obviously very, very professional in his capacity as a pilot of a light aircraft. He knows exactly what to say and how to say it when he's reporting what he's seeing to air traffic control. But if you're just putting yourself in the moment and what he might be experiencing and seeing and listening to the words that he's saying, which unfortunately there's a lot of noise in his transmission. It needs to be cleaned up. Hopefully someone will do a clean audio edition at some point. But yeah, it's just truly chilling. A chilling audio recording. I've never heard anything like it. And when I heard it and went home, I kept playing it in my head over and over and again. And I know, some people have asked me about it over time, and they could probably find the Valentic version of the transmission on YouTube. As I believed, a researcher in the US released it some years ago, but did not release the air traffic controllers portion because, again, the legalities potentially associated with that. But just such a tragic case, but also such a fascinating one because you've got that layer of evidence that's and data that comes with it, being the transmission, the radio transmission.
Yeah,
Yeah, and there's a great sorry to cut you off. There's a great,
no.
I mean, I've only kind of skimmed the surface on the Valentic case. There's a great researcher in Australia by the name of George Simpson. He's authored a book called Nothing on Radar. And there is alleged to be a photograph that was taken by someone else, completely not associated with Valentic, but someone that lived in the vicinity of where Valentic encountered this object earlier in the day. This individual captured on their camera a very strange looking kind of, what would you call it, a shiny orb-like sort of image. And it's actually on the front cover. It's the front cover image of George Simpson's book called Nothing on Radar. So you can actually see it on the front cover of his book. So, whether that is directly linked to the Valentic disappearance, I don't know, but it's interesting that it was captured the same day that it was reported to have happened. There have been some other kind of fantastical claims that have been put out there over the years that potentially tie to the Valentic case, but I don't think those have been entirely credible reports that are linked to the case. But that's just another piece of the puzzle altogether. So yeah, anyone that's not familiar with the Valentic case, I mean, there's a whole Wikipedia page devoted to it, and you can find some really good documentaries that have been done by interested researchers on YouTube out there as well. So, and like Jane Kyle, UFO Jane, who we haven't seen in a long time, she has I know that for a fact that she has a fascination with the Valentic case, and early on I was able to share with her some reports that the ATSB, the Air Traffic Safety Bureau in Australia, had on Valentic and released a number of years ago. So I know that she's one researcher that has an interest in it outside of the United States.
Yeah,
outside of Australia, I should say.
Right. Well, and two things to kind of wrap up the Valentic case. There were a lot of UFOs reported in Australia in that region at the time, which I think we should keep in mind. And the second is our mutual colleague Micah Hanks actually has dug very deep into the case. He was even able to befriend the former girlfriend of Valentic at the time. She's getting up there in age at this point. However, there were claims that he was trying to fake his death, or that this was sort of a suicide flight that he was going on. These very dark sort of avenues people were going down to try to explain what happened. But she was the first to tell Micah, no, like, he was not suicidal. There was nothing like that. He wasn't faking his death. We had plans that night, actually, after the flight. And she said, no, he encountered something up there. I'm convinced of that. And he knew what he was doing the entire time until, unfortunately, he lost his life. So there's a lot to back up this story for sure.
Right.
It's definitely one of my favorites as well.
And it's not really a link, but a common thread with Westall. So, a couple of kilometers from the Westall High School is an airport called Moorabbin Airport, where a lot of light aircraft take off and land. And that's the airport that Valentic took off from when he flew down to Cape Otway. So, it's just not that it has any connection with Westall, but there's a common link there in Moorabbin Airport, which is discussed frequently in the Westall incident for those that dive down other rabbit holes. But I wasn't aware of the fact that Micah had done a deep dive of that, so I'll have to suss out his research on it.
I believe we talked about it in episode 2 or 3 of Somewhere in the Sky. So if you dig way back into our archives, we did speak about that. We may even have audio from his girlfriend. I know he did do an audio interview with her, so it is definitely worth seeking out if you guys can, for sure. Guys, I'm going to say now, if you have any questions that you would like to ask Grant, put them in the chat with in capital letters with a Q, or put them in the super chat, and we will get to those as we begin to wrap things up here. But the last thing I personally wanted to talk to you about, Grant, is your involvement in this documentary series that premiered over in Australia. I was so happy to see,
Yeah.
more media coming out of your neck of the woods and taken very seriously. So, could you tell us a little about your involvement with this project, what it was, and what was covered in this documentary series?
Totally, yeah. So it was a really great it was a six part documentary series called Close Encounters Down Under that I had the good fortune of participating in. Keith Basterfield actually put me forward to the producers as someone that might be worthy for inclusion in the series, and it's a great series in the sense that there are so many fascinating and interesting UFO cases in Australia that a lot of folks don't know about. I mean, Valentic and Westall are probably the two most famous ones known about, but there's so many others as well, and so it dives into UAP UFO cases down under in all of the different states within Australia, not just Victoria, where I am now. And so I was invited, and the filming of this was actually going back in, I believe, COVID. So it took a while for the production side of the filming of it to be done. It actually came out. It premiered last year, and it's for anyone that hasn't seen it, it's called Close Encounters Down Under. And if you're in the UK, I believe you can watch it on was it Blaze TV, I think it's
That
called.
sounds right. Yeah.
Yeah, Blaze TV. If you're in Australia, you can watch it on 7plus. If you go to the 7plus website and just type in Close Encounters Down Under, you'll find it. I've got links to it on my my Twitter and X profile. So if you just search for Close Encounters Down Under on my X account, you'll find it. And it's free to watch. And so it's and the episode that I was privileged to be invited to participate in was episode number 4, which also happens to be a number of the Westall primary witnesses were interviewed for a segment on that episode. My involvement with the series, I'm only featured in very briefly in episode 4. I was just providing some insights and perspectives on the Australian government's involvement, or rather lack thereof, and lack thereof engagement on the UAP topic at the time, and was really just hitting home that Australia and the United States are the closest of allies, yet our positions on UAP couldn't be further apart. The US and our Five Eyes partner is taking this very seriously, but Australia is not. And why is Australia not? And it kind of talked about Senator Wish Wilson and the questions that he had been asking of the then Chief of Air Force, Air Marshal Mel Hupfield, in October of 2021. So that's what I was able to bring the conversation, just looking at through the lens of government and documents that I've been able to secure for release through FOIA. So I didn't actually have any involvement from or was able to bring anything to the table from specific cases. My involvement was really limited to the Australian government's lack of engagement and my efforts to try and advocate for the topic by exercising my right to information through FOIA and so on. But it was a great series. Bill Chalker, who's a veteran UAP UFO researcher, a gentleman that I've gotten to know fairly well and have been able to learn from both he and Keith Basterfield directly over the last few years. He's featured in quite heavily throughout all of the episodes, as is Roger Stankovic, who is the Australian New Zealand director of MUFON, and he recently presented at the MUFON symposium in the US on Havana syndrome. He's a really good bloke. So it's great to see a number of folks that I've gotten to know and learn from also be involved in this series. So it was very well done.
That's awesome, man. Yeah, and like I said, your involvement could inspire someone else to go seek that information too when it comes to FOIA and everything. So that's great. I can't wait to give it a watch. I haven't had a chance yet, but I'm looking forward to it. I do have Blaze here in the UK, so I'll definitely be giving it a watch. That's great. So I want to move to we have a super chat here, which is pretty interesting. And I believe this is a friend and colleague of yours
Ah,
and
yes.
mine as well. UAP, oh gosh,
Good luck.
AT Roa. Yeah, yeah. I hope I'm saying that right. And his question pertains to kind of what we were talking about at the top of the show. Do you think that OIA in NZ and Australia on Five Eyes intelligence sharing is blocked due to Intel services interaction? Grant is free to discuss my OIAs as privately shared for support CMA only. PK level classification. So there's a lot going on in that question, a lot of acronyms. But yeah, if you want to maybe break that down and maybe crystallize any of that for us, Grant, what are your thoughts on that? Do you think
Yeah.
that the intelligence is being shared with New Zealand?
So firstly, shout out to Colin at UAP Aotearoa. He does some great work with other folks in New Zealand that are taking the topic seriously. I know there's another gentleman by the name of Nick. They're all exercising their right to information and trying to get information on what the New Zealand Defence Force is doing or not doing about UAP and what its level of engagement was at ARO's Five Eyes UAP Caucus Working Group meeting. So the OIA is the equivalent of Australia's and the US's FOIA. So OIA, and correct me if I'm wrong, is the Official Information Act. So New Zealand citizens can request documents from their government comparable with Australia and the US on FOIA. So I can say with a high degree of confidence through just the documents that I've been able to secure for release to date, and even documents that I haven't been able to secure for release because they've been refused due to FOIA exemptions, I can say with a high degree of confidence that the Australian Defence representative that attended ARA's Five Eyes UAP Caucus Working Group meeting was a representative from the Defence Intelligence Organisation. And so UAP, Aotearoa, and Nick and others in New Zealand are running into the same issues of trying to get information from the New Zealand Defence Force on who represented New Zealand at this ARA's Five Eyes forum. And I have a sneaking suspicion that potentially the reason why it's so difficult to get anything out of New Zealand as well is that it quite possibly may be that the intelligence services, namely the New Zealand Defence Intelligence Service, a representative of that intelligence agency, was one of the representatives at the Five Eyes Forum. And I don't know, UAP Aotearoa might be able to confirm this, but I anticipate that, like with the Defence Intelligence Organisation in Australia, that the New Zealand Defence Intelligence Service may also be exempt from OIA. So we're not going to get anything out of them. After I posted these documents, the meeting schedule for ARA's meeting, and it's a significant document, it got retweeted by Christopher Mellon. Nick Pope commented on it, and Nick Pope, who a lot of people know, has he's claimed to have been with the Ministry of Defence in the UFO office, and he is of the opinion that perhaps it was the Defence Intelligence Services in the UK that were represented at ARA's Five Eyes forum as well. Now, whether they're exempt from the UK's version of FOIA, I don't know. So, but Colin at UAP Aotearoa was able to provide me with correspondence that he had received from the Ombudsman in New Zealand, which basically, if I just see if I can read it here, I'm gonna have to throw my glasses on here. Basically, they, UAP Aotearoa was going after records and documentation pertaining to the New Zealand representative that we know attended the Five Eyes briefing. And basically, they came back to him saying that, they were able to form the opinion that the New Zealand Defence Force was entitled to refuse UAP Aotearoa's request under a certain section of the Official Information Act on the basis that the information does not exist or cannot be located. So they're basically saying to him that, we don't have any records pertaining to any New Zealand Defence Force representation at the Five Eyes meeting, which is in direct contrast with what Brandy Vincent was able to report for Defense Scoop the month, a couple of weeks after Dr. Sean Kirkpatrick said at NASA's public briefing that we had a Five Eyes forum. Brandy Vincent, to her credit, she who does some wonderful reporting for Defense Scoop, people should follow her work. She reached out to all of the Five Eyes. The only one that she wasn't able to get a comment from was the UK Ministry of Defence, but she got comment from the New Zealand Defence Force, confirming that it had a representative from the New Zealand Defence Force attend this Five Eyes forum on UAP by ARA. And there have been subsequent documents that folks like UAP Aotearoa and Nick and others in New Zealand have been able to get from their elected representatives and at a ministerial level, saying that, yes, we did have a New Zealand Defence Force representative attend, but now you're getting this pushback against these requests for information, saying that, no, sorry, we can't provide you with any records pertaining to New Zealand Defence Force's attendance at this briefing because we can't, it doesn't exist. And so it's just so frustrating that folks are having so much trouble just trying to get basic information out of their government. I mean, look how tough it was for me just to get an admission and the senator to get an admission from the Australian Department of Defence that we did in fact attend after they denied it initially. So it's just it's so frustrating. And Colin, if there's anything you want to add to that in your comment, if you're still on the live stream, feel free. But kudos to folks like UAP Aotearoa and others that are trying to do their best, just like I am, and Daniel Otis in Canada, who's doing some wonderful investigative journalism on trying to find out what our countries are lending to the conversation.
Absolutely. Kudos to anyone willing to put in the work, time, and effort. And a special thanks for the super chat question as well to UAP. That was it's very well needed. And it's so frustrating, Grant, to think, why can't you just admit that someone was there, that someone was present? Like, that's enough for people to be like, okay, at least we know the Five Eyes are involved in this. They probably are under the assumption that once you know someone was there, then the real true FOIA equivalent requests will start coming in. But yeah, just to say it doesn't exist, it just seems so condescending to me.
It's so frustrating too. I mean, I've reached out to obviously the Australian Minister for Defence, Richard Marles, the Australian Defence Media Team, as well as Susan Gough, who's the Pentagon spokesperson on basically UAP. And when I reached out to Susan Gough, asking her to provide information about, well, Australia's saying it didn't attend the Five Eyes Forum on UAP. Can you confirm this? Can you verify this? And she said, any information pertaining to the attendance by the Five Eyes countries is the responsibility is for comment only by each Five Eyes member country. But then you have inquiries being submitted to the New Zealand Defence Force, and this is in Brandy Vincent's reporting, I believe. They're saying, oh no, you need to contact the US Department of Defence if you have any more queries about New Zealand's attendance at the Five. So you're getting the complete runaround. The left hand doesn't know what the right hand's doing, and people are just getting the runaround. And that's, again, another part that's so frustrating, is that, what is it going to take just to get some truthful and accurate answers to questions that we ask? Because more often than not, you get redirected to someone else, or you just get a blatant non-answer to the query and the question that you've asked. And that's, unfortunately, I've come to accept that with Susan Gough. I'll ask a question and I'll get a completely different answer that even doesn't address the question that I asked. Again, I think it's all part of a strategic narrative. The Australian and the United States Department of Defence, as well as the New Zealand Defence Force, wants to control the narrative. They want to control the conversation and not reveal any information that could be of potential embarrassment to the government. And that's true of the United States, and I think the UK and Canada as well. So that's the world we live in.
It's the world we're living in. UFOs 2024, my friend. To kind of put a cap on all of this, Grant, thank you guys for your questions. If you have any more questions for Grant, feel free to put them in the comments section of the YouTube version of this episode, and I'll be sure to get those over to Grant, and maybe he can even answer them in the comments of the video in time. He's a busy man. He's got a new kid as well. So so
Yep,
it is what it is. Yeah.
and I've said before, marriage and the UFO topic don't always go hand in hand. So sometimes,
Don't I know it?
sometimes
Don't
my
I know
wife
it?
is like, "Come on, you've got a family. Get off Twitter or X and stop reading that article." So I try and sneak in catching up on podcasts and live streams or reading articles when I'm out for a walk, or when it's time where I've got to myself. So which is not much these days, but
Well,
it's all
man,
part of the.
yeah, I appreciate you giving us almost 2 hours of your
No
time and
problem.
keeping you away from Grey's Anatomy for just a little bit
That's
for
right.
tonight over there in Australia.
Exactly right.
But I do want to end, Grant, with any last words you want to give the audience on where we are at in 2024 with
Yeah,
UFOs.
I
It
mean, look,
seems like not a lot has been happening, but I would argue there's a lot still happening just below
yeah.
the surface. But yeah, any last words you want to give our audience?
Well, look, I mean, it's I've always said, for those of us that are truly fascinated and curious with this topic, and do take it seriously, and want to learn as much as we can and just know what's going on. I mean, it does feel sometimes like it's a full-time job just to keep up to date with what's going on, and you do have these moments where it does ebb and flow in this topic. It might feel like it's in a bit of a lull at the moment where there's not a lot going on, but you listen, you read the great work that folks like Douglas Dean Johnson are doing, providing updates that maybe aren't making headlines, are happening behind the scenes at the congressional level. With the UAP Disclosure Act 2.0 potentially being something that there is to look forward to later this year if it does get some traction and get passed. We know it was completely gutted last year, but we did get some provisions with records have to be disclosed to the National Archives by, I think, October of this year. But there is potentially another effort for the UAP Disclosure Act to rear its head again this year for the National Defence Authorization Act. And we've just had the revelation that Lou Elizondo's book Imminent is not far away. That's scheduled for release, I think, next month in some countries in August. And there was a leak or an inadvertent premature release of the preview of his book, which was pretty significant. I think it was about 100 and there's a several number of chapters
That was
from
weird. Yeah.
his book. It was just so weird that it was put up there, like, Google, for anyone that doesn't know, Google Books, if a author or a publisher, and you would certainly know this, Ryan, if you have your books available for sale with Google Books, they often offer a limited preview of the book to encourage people to get have a sense as to what the contents of the book look like, and it often can encourage pre-orders and book sales as well. But it was just so bizarre that it was all of a sudden this limited preview is up online on Google Books, and then as quickly as it went up, only a day or two later, it was completely removed. So and I didn't even get an opportunity to read it. I only got through Christopher Mellon's foreword. I didn't even get a chance to read it. So I'm not really apprised of what's even in the limited preview of Lou's book. But I pre-ordered it when it was first announced that it was available for ordering. So I mean, I look forward to reading it. I don't know if we that take the topic seriously and maybe are well-versed in researching it will have any significant revelations. I'm sure there's going to be massive breadcrumbs that will have folks like John Greenwald submitting tons of FOIA requests, following up on bits and pieces. But I suspect that the book, from what I've heard from people that have read the limited preview, that it might more so be catered to a broader mass audience, the broader public, much like the 60 Minutes piece was on UAP. it might be more aimed and intended for a much broader audience. So, some people might be disappointed if they're not, getting all of the fantastical revelations that they're expecting. I don't know. I haven't read it yet, but I'm looking forward to having a read of it and just seeing what's in there. And having folks like John Greenwald Jr. follow up and be able to try and get more and more breadcrumbs that are dropped along the way on each page.
That's right, my friend. It's, Elizondo puts the ball in the air and John Greenwald spikes it. That's the plan. That's the plan. I will tell you this.
Did you have a chance to read it? Did you
I was
have a
just
chance
going to
to read
say,
the preview? Oh,
I
right.
did. I read through the chapters. It will get people talking. For better or worse, it's definitely created some chatter online already. Which, if this was all a mistake, a leak, as it were, or just an accidental preview put up there, like, we have to keep that in mind. Like, the
Yeah.
word leak, I think, is used very liberally lately in the UFO field. It could easily have just been a miscommunication where it was put up online a little too soon.
I
But
wouldn't be surprised if that's that's all that happened.
yeah,
I mean, again, always assume a screw up before a conspiracy, and unfortunately, a lot of folks will jump to the conspiracy before the screw up.
always.
But who knows? I mean, I don't think I think there may have been anything nefarious. I think it may have just been an unintentional early release.
Right. If accidental or not, what a marketing ploy. Let me be completely
that's right.
honest.
Yeah.
Got people talking.
Any
Yeah.
press is good press. So
Yep.
it can't help with book sales, and
Yep. Exactly.
So,
Exactly.
but I mean, I know a lot of people have talked about it, and then there's just this ridiculous thing on. I mean, I try and stay out of the drama, but now you have Jason Sands coming out and think of him what you will, and he's a controversial figure, but coming out in a space saying or not saying, and it was misinterpreted that Jay Anderson from Project Unity was the one that was responsible for there being a leak of the limited preview, because he's based in the UK, and as is the publisher. And I don't add any weight to that. I don't think there is anything to that, but unfortunately, just so many people maybe get bored with the fact that there's nothing to talk about. So as soon as there's a breadcrumb or a whiff of some drama or a conspiracy, that's the talking point of the day. And until there's something else controversial to talk about. So
Yeah.
I don't give any. I mean, it's not important to me. That kind of conspiratorial drama, but it's what people do. They want to talk about the drama.
So wait, you're telling me Jay lives in the UK, and so does the publisher, and so do I. Oh my God, Grant.
You're all
Could
part
I
of it.
be the leaker?
You can.
Come on,
Yeah.
guys. You could do better than someone living in the same damn country to be
I
the
know.
one to leak
And
it.
I mean, I think that was just a complete misinterpretation. Like
Me too.
Jason Sands, his nickname, he goes by Jay. And basically, Jason, to summarize, I won't bore your audience, but Jason Sands in this space was saying that he knows Lou. I don't know if that's true. He had dinner with Lou a few nights ago, and Lou was saying to Jason Sands that about the leak, or the fact that the limited preview of the book was out there, and Jason Sands were that Lou said, Jay, Unity hates me, and a lot of people took that as they linked Jay with and Unity as Jay from Project Unity. This is my interpretation of what Jason Sands is saying. I think Jason Sands is saying that Lou was saying to Jason, hey, Jay short for Jason, Unity hates me. And the fact that the book got a limited preview of the book got released. I'm trying to unify the community to a degree by putting all the information out there and making people decide on their own. And there's now this big kerfuffle about this limited preview. That was my interpretation of what Jason Sands said, but some people, namely Skyfire News, took it as the fact that Jason Sands was saying that Lou said that Jay from Project Unity was responsible for this leaking of his book Imminent. So that kind of gives you a sense as to how ridiculous it all is. But, again, I just caught wind of that very briefly. I could be completely wrong, but, it's just that's how I read it, as just a misunderstanding and misinterpretation from some folks.
It is what it is, and that's as drama-filled as we're getting here on Somewhere in the Skies. I have no interest in it. We will wait till the book comes out, and I eagerly await the publication to begin to parse through it as well. So, Grant.
And I have a question for you, my friend.
Oh, please,
Speaking of
please.
books, how are you going with your book? You're currently working on a
Oh,
new one,
gosh.
is that right?
Thank you for asking. Yes, I actually posted about this a couple days ago over on my personal Facebook. I am halfway done with my new manuscript for my third book, which will sort of be the final one in my quote unquote trilogy. I guess it's my Return of the Jedi or my Revenge of the Sith. But yes, it'll be the most global spanning personal endeavor I've ever done on the UFO topic within my book. I'm super excited about it. I've been working over 6 years on it. So I've been working on it as I was writing the other books. So yes, I'm hoping sometime in 2025 I will have that out. So yes, busy as always, writing, doing the podcasts, ghost hunting in Canada of all things. So staying busy over at Somewhere in the Skies and on Haunted in Nova Scotia. So yeah, thank you for asking.
And correct me if I'm wrong. So your first book, and this is just for my interest, was really focused on the human element to the phenomena, the human condition. The second book, which I have, is more about specific cases that you have curated over years from people you've spoken to. What, if you can share, what is the third book? Does it follow a similar track, or is it different altogether?
It's kind of a melding of the first two. So it will be my personal journey through all of this. Whether it's UFOs, the paranormal, the people we've met along the way. It really is, each chapter focuses on an individual who has inspired my work. So not so much the plethora of UFO cases that I've looked into or that I've covered, but the people who've inspired me and their personal journeys along the way. So, I can say right now, I have a chapter on Peter Robbins, who is my mentor in the UFO field. There's a gentleman in Hawaii who I got to spend a lot of time with, a master storyteller, native Hawaiian, who I do a whole chapter on him and his experiences growing up on the island and the mythologies there. So it really does focus on one person in each chapter. It's extremely detailed, rich, and it's again in their own words, which is my big thing, Grant. I don't like to put words in the mouths of those who have had experiences. So I kind of let them speak for themselves while I create a narrative around it of my journey with them, if that makes sense. So
interesting.
Yeah. It's an opus.
Yeah. And do you out of interest, again, sorry to bore your audience, but do you actually journal as you go out and because I mean, I'm terrible at, if I was considering writing an article or something on what I've been trying to do to date, my recollection is, I mean, often I can't remember what I did yesterday, so I'm really bad at recalling stuff. So, but do you journal? Does that help your writing process, or do you just recall a lot of the stuff as you go?
It really depends. There are many times where I will write down like a emotional buzzword that happened during something I did. But I can tell you this, my short-term memory is the worst. Like you said, I can't even remember what I had for breakfast. However, I can remember things from 2-3 years ago in like almost crystal clear detail. So I wouldn't say I have a photographic memory, but I do have, and I get this from my grandfather actually, who could like recall what he did have for breakfast when he was like 10 years old, some 50 years later, but he couldn't remember, what he had for breakfast that morning. So it's a blessing and a curse, but so a lot of it does come from memory. And a lot of it comes with follow-up with the individuals. I've been sitting down for hours upon hours with each of them, being like, what do you remember what happened here? Let's connect these dots. And again, just really diving into how strange the world really is, the people who choose to pursue those things, and how that's inspired me as
Ah,
a
okay.
investigator of the anomalous. So
Right.
yeah, it's I'm really excited. So thank you. This is really the first time I've spoken about
No,
any of the
I'm
content in the
very
book.
interested to hear you talk about it. So, cheers
Yeah.
for me. Thanks for sharing it. So.
No, thank you. No, thank you. No, thank you. Um, all right, my friend. We've been going over 2 hours, so I'm going to let you go. I know it's
Oh, we
getting
have
late
to. Yeah.
over there. And Suzanne's got to start her morning as well. So I
Sorry for
want to
keeping
thank
you up,
her.
Suzanne. I'm sorry. Yeah.
She's been
No.
doing incredible today. I want to thank everyone
Trooper.
in the chat for your questions, your comments. But most importantly, our last question for you, Grant, before you go, where can we find everything you're up to and what comes next for Grant Lavac?
So I'm mostly on in terms of social, mostly on X, Twitter. If anyone wants to follow my journey on the topic, just follow me at Grant Lavac. My YouTube channel is called the Unexplained Rundown. If you just search for that in YouTube or just type in my name, you'll find my channel. My primary focus is again trying to understand Australia's involvement and rather lack thereof on the UAP topic. So most of my videos are on that theme. But I do have obviously other documentaries. The Westall case. I did a documentary on Kurt Russell and the Phoenix Lights. One of my most one of the cases I'm most interested in.
Right.
And in terms of what I'm working on, I've got a couple of projects that I'm trying to work on in the time that I have available. One of them is again, think of these gentlemen what you will, but both Dr. Stephen Greer and Chris Bledsoe have claimed on numerous occasions now in the last 12 to 24 months that they have had engagement with the Australian Department of Defence on the UAP topic. And the Department of Defence said that it stopped investigating UAP in 1996. So if Dr. Stephen Greer has briefed a former Australian Minister for Defence in possibly 2013, I want to try and dive down that rabbit hole and see if I can find any documentation that confirms that claim or completely refutes it. And likewise with Chris Bledsoe, he has made some claims that he has been engaged by the representative in the Australian Department of Defence. And so that's another rabbit hole I'm following down again, just trying to find documentary evidence that supports the claim or refutes it. So whenever I hear anything about Australia and the UAP topic, my ears prick up and I want to learn more. So that's what I'm currently working on.
Awesome. And we have put your Twitter handle in the show notes as well and in the chat. We have links to the UFO documentary series and your video on Westall and the UAP caucus as well, guys. So be sure to check out the show notes for this episode for all of that. Be sure to go follow everything Grant's doing. Subscribe to his YouTube channel right here on YouTube if that's where you're joining us. And brother, I got to thank you. This was a marathon. We covered so much, and it gives me so
We
much
did.
hope. It really gives me hope that we're going to get some answers to at least Australia's involvement in this topic, because I am sick about talking about the United States, man, in every way, shape, and form.
Well, look, and that's what I'd say. What I've been really pleasantly surprised by is how just this document that we've reviewed tonight, and I'll say this as my closing thought, has really triggered other folks in those other countries. Gary Hesterlin in the UK, who I've had some engagement with, UAP Aotearoa in New Zealand, Daniel Otis in Canada, John Greenwald Jr. in the US, obviously. There are people in each Five Eyes country that are now following up lines of inquiry that are important to them on what their respective countries' involvement was in this ARO's Five Eye UAP caucus working group. So I'm really pleased that I've been able to bring something to the table that has motivated others to now ask their respective countries and exercise their right to information and try and get more answers to questions that we have. So, and that's what drives me. If we can get more information that helps each of us find answers to questions that are important to us, then that's only a positive thing. That's only a good thing.
Absolutely. Let's focus on the positives, guys. And you are definitely one of them, Grant, in this field. So again, I want to thank you, man, for coming on Somewhere in the Skies today. And I want to thank all of you for joining us today for this special live podcast recording. And I will leave you guys with our outro as always. And that is keep your feet on the ground, but never stop searching somewhere in the skies. Take care.